but you're not talking about something that the neighborhood capacity or network hasn't already absorbed without too much concern. So I'm leery of the idea that this is a requirement because of something that may come to pass. It's certainly not a requirement now. And as you guys do your analysis, you'll look at it and see, most people I think would agree if the concern is that retail development will somehow slow down traffic. There's not a lot of people shopping between 7:30 and 9 a.m., which is sort of your peak hour. So I have a little trouble seeing the connection between what we're proposing to do and some sort of slowdown on Westport Avenue. So that's something I think clearly you'll be able to analyze better as you start looking at the plan. But
if I may.
Yeah, sure.
So my question is,
my computer off, you did that yesterday.
On Westport Avenue, the kind of the direct question that was asked is, would it be a 2-lane road with parking on the street? Would it be continue to stay a 4-lane road in your proposal, or the hybrid of that? Would it be a 4-lane road where you have off-peak parking on the street and peak time you would have the benefit of all 4 lanes?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me you answered the question, right? I mean, first off, it's clear we don't control what happens to the roads. We recognize that. We can make requests and proposals and all that type of stuff, but the roads are the purview of the county. Again, what you're saying is perfectly logical, right? Could it be that it becomes exactly what it is today with striped parking that's for, non-rush hour times of the day? That seems like a pretty simple solution to me. But I'm not in control of the streets. I think for purposes of retail, does it help to have some amount of street parking during times of the day when people are shopping? Sure, no doubt about it. But as I said, we don't control the roads, so in our view, we have to sort of work on what we control on our sites and work with the county on that. And certainly, I think the road staying as it is with better sidewalks, which we can control because we own the property, so we can make it better sidewalks. We can use, that ability to create a streetscape that's an appealing streetscape for people to walk, to bike, whatever that may be. And if to contribute to that is you have parking except for rush hours, then that I think would be a great thing. And I think it gives everyone sort of what they want personally. So that's sort of the answer on that. And the last thing I'll say about the traffic is we had talked at our meeting about the possibility of a shuttle bus to sort of increase that public transit aspect of the project, and I think that's critical. And I'm happy to hear that you talked about that with other landowners, and it sounds like they have been somewhat responsive to that idea as well, because I think that's critical to anything that happens here is that ability to help people get to and from the mass transit opportunities. And so we continue to be in favor of anything we can do to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think actually that with regards to the 4-lane, 2-lane notion on Westport Avenue was mainly because we don't know what it is that you are proposing.
Well, I think we've been pretty clear. I mean, I think our idea is that,
and I think actually just to back that up, I mean, there's been a lot of chatter around the community. People keep citing Bethesda. And I know Bethesda Avenue as a constrained street with only 2 lanes in each, with only 1 lane in each direction with the parking and with a lot of folks who are crossing back and forth. There was a lot of concern about that, but if there is the ability for this development to still have the retail street but maintain the travel capacity of the road, I think that starts to paint a different picture. So.
Well, the point I would add is Bethesda Avenue is a different sort of street. It's not sort of perpendicular to the street that goes through. It's sort of something to think about. Perpendicular, right? And so one needs to think about that. But what I've seen in the schemes here is certainly an idea of more connectivity, which I think is a good thing. Good for the equity one side, and I think good for just overall mobility. There, I mean, you guys are showing a lot of streets through private property and things. Some of those may be do think, there is a paradigm for what you all were just talking about. Connecticut Avenue has off-peak parking. And, places like Cleveland Park and Liberty Park are very nice areas where people consider their main streets. And so there are models here that one can take a look at it and consider seriously. I think the one thing is for a place to have good vibrancy and a good sense of place. One really has to balance the needs of people on bikes and pedestrians and cars and help not favor one totally over the other. It has to be kind of balanced. And so the idea that less parks and like sketches here can become a street with retail frontage on it means that you want people crossing the street. You want people to feel that they can safely cross the street at intersections, and that's managed and designed in ways so the cars are able to get through that, but they're not going through there 50, 60 miles an hour. They're going through there at a rate at a speed that's safe for pedestrians, but at the same time. So I think there's a lot of promise in what's been put out before. I do think to make a really good pedestrian environment, one needs to be mindful of things like parallel parking and good spacing, like traffic lights and crosswalks and buildings that define street-facing architecture and so on.
So, if I might add to that, with regards to public space and the civic space.
I was just about to get to that.
Sure, and I just wanted to go and get your comments on the civic space and the public amenities.
I'm just reading my notes. So, yeah, no, and to that, I think the discussion has been really helpful, actually, because, it's funny, I was talking to a few people, and there was no shortage for what people would like to see as sort of the public space, amenity, whatever you want to call it, during the outreach we had done. Library was not on that list, and I don't know if that was just maybe we missed it, or maybe it just didn't occur, whatever. But I mean, look, I have been involved with developments where libraries were part of it. I think they're obviously great spaces, not just for people who are using the library, but to serve as that sort of civic space for meetings, for community gatherings, for events, whatever it might be. And that piece of an amenity clearly came through during our meetings, which was the need for a space where people could gather, clubs, groups, associations, whatever it may be. So to the extent, the library does that as well, then it is something that we heard a real demand for.
And if I might go ahead with regards to the library again, this is an idea that kind of bubbled up to the surface back on Monday night, and as we thought about it, really kind of killed three birds with one stone. You might have heard me say that really, the library is kind of a framework to the public space. As it is, we have a library that is currently tucked away in the corner of the sector plan that's antiquated and small.
I'm total about library, come on, take it easy.
It's cute. Actually, as an architect, I have to say it's period piece, but having the library be engaged with the heart and soul of the community, and being able to go and have a modern library as part of this, and we can name Rockville, we can name Silver Spring, and also too, there's also this discussion in regards to school. The library is moving off of that site would lead an opportunity for schools to have a better site.
Yeah, again, my feeling is we're happy to have the discussion about a potential relocation of the library. Similar to Ridgefield Road, it's one that involves a lot of different agencies. It's the libraries, it's the schools, there's a sort of group of municipal agencies that need to come to an agreement on that, but we're happy to be in that discussion and see if we can work it into whatever we're doing. I think it could be great. I will say, just as another thought, is that I do think that we have some ideas about what, based on what we had heard at our meetings and Matt's experience at Perkins Eastman. So we would like to, present what we think could be some pretty great amenity spaces. It was interesting when I was here for the first session, or not the first, but maybe the second session with Town of Somerset. Someone put it very well, I thought, which is that they don't need to be, what she said they don't need to be huge, but they need to be good gathering places. And that is exactly how we feel, is that size is not a great corollary for, activity, for use, for programming, you need some size clearly, and we have enough land that we can be generous and create great spaces, but I think it's much more about creating the right type of gathering spaces. And so we do think we'll have something to contribute that, and if the library works in with that or whatever, I think either way, we view the open space and the civic amenity piece as something that will be part of our project.
And we feel the same way too. Again, it's really about the quality. It's not about the size of the space. And if it is a good quality activated space that serves the needs of the community as kind of the heart and soul, that is exactly what we're trying to approach.
Yeah. And look, with the schools, we're well aware of the concern about the schools, and what I've said from the start is we'll work with the neighborhood, with the school board, with whoever we have to work with. And if, the idea has come up of reserving a school site as a possible option, you said very clearly, and I heard from the school board rep, Bruce Crispo, that they have several options they look at, and a new school is just one of them.
Right.
But our goal would be to do whatever we can do to make it so that all of the options remain on the table. And if that entails a new school, then we would certainly work and see what can be arranged. It's like I said, it's something that came up this week, so I haven't really had a lot of time to digest it, but clearly we've given a lot of thought as well as to what can be done with the schools, and we have heard from the Board of Ed the same thing that he told everyone in the community, which is you have the option of an expansion, you have the option of new boundaries, you have the option of a new school, and we look at them all. And so, we're sort of right with everyone else in trying to make sure that the right solution happens for that if a solution is required. So I guess the only other thing I wanted to touch on, and I'm realizing it's not really reflected in the plans, but I think it was in the PowerPoint that was showed the other night, was there was some discussion about heights.
Actually, that's why I pulled up the PowerPoint because, yeah, and on each of these schemes, we have the land use and heights labeled on scheme 1 with regards to the giant, with the equity one side, they're looking at 50 feet for the new local retail. For scheme 2, it was again looking at 50 feet there. And then for scheme 3, actually, I think they're all showing 50 feet there. And that is really based on what we have heard from the community in trying to go and maintain a neighborhood scale. And of course, there are probably variations on that.
Yeah.
It'll probably be lower as you are closer to Kenwood Place, and being more dense as you get closer to the industrial zone.
Yeah, and I think that's something we've stated very clearly that we're a believer in, that as you get, further from the edges of our project, it's more appropriate to go higher and closer to the residential edges. It should be in scale. I think we shared some heights that we thought were appropriate on our Monday meeting. I think we talked the Giant Center maybe having a slightly higher height to allow for the potential townhouses or sort of low-rise residential, which might put it closer to 60 or 65. It's not a huge difference from where you are at the 50 feet. And on the other side of Westport Avenue, it looks like you have a range there. I mean, I think we had said for our site where it's currently the bowling alley, that maybe that was in the neighborhood of 120 feet, and that was based on what the HOC tower was and what Park Bethesda is. So it was sort of fitting within that context, and sort of, I think this building that we're in today, we actually propose to be slightly lower since it's closer to the residential across the street. So there's not a radical difference from where we were sort of hoping to be and where your initial proposals are. And I think it's going to get down to a design issue. I think if there's a way to design it properly, I think the height we're talking about is not going to feel much different. And that's really our challenge, is to convince people that we can design, or Matt, I should say, that Matt can design, a 65-foot structure on the Giant site that people will go, oh, that works, that doesn't feel bad. And so that's our challenge, to sort of make that make that apparent to people over the next few months. So,
Again, and I just want to remind the community that those folks who are along your boundary of Kenwood Place, that it would either match that or be slightly lower than Kenwood Place, and that along Westford Avenue, that those would be something more in keeping with the neighborhood scale. And that's why we did put up the 50 feet for that side. So, and we heard again from that Park Bethesda, though it is a tall structure, it is a structure that is
getting taller.
Yes, it's a non-conformity relative to the so it shouldn't be used as an entry.
I think it's Park Bethesda plus the HOC tower,
And the
which is
HOC
even taller.
which is
So
even taller.
at a certain point, non-conformity, but it's,
Right.
that's what the whole side of the street is. So I'm not sure what is conforming.
The other thing I would put out there for consideration is that there's a lot of very, very nice in-scale townhouse product that goes up to 45 feet.
Mhm.
And I think that's maybe a number to think about, or even that. And I think part of the thing with the condominium complex in Kenwood Place is that sits uphill, and we're downhill from that a little bit. So be mindful of that. I think a general sort of stick over concrete number is 65 feet. So you were saying 50.
4 over 1.
4 over 1 is something you might want to consider, because that's a model that I think a lot of people feel is very much in scale with neighborhood scales like this. And it's a model that this market knows how to build.
Just Akash with EYA. So with regard to the housing, and so some of the townhouse product could be a sort of a similar size and scale to that. So I encourage folks to sort of take a look at that as an option. Park Potomac is another example. I think you actually have it on your building precedent board with regard to roles in the area. In terms of the type of housing, I think there's been a lot of discussion around schools and the type of housing that might be offered. And if Little Falls Place is an indication, the type of housing that we're providing is intentionally geared towards empty nesters, some young professionals as well, but empty nesters are the predominant group of folks that are moving into the Little Falls Place. I think this market is a very good market for sort of larger units, folks who live in the neighborhood and could actually downsize into something here on site, kind of like within walking distance of the retail. So the idea that we have, I think, why this is a good partnership is to focus on that type of housing, sort of less school age intensive and more focused on the day, maybe looking for a different lifestyle.
Now, I know EYA has partnered up with HOC in many instances. What were you contemplating with regards to affordable housing for this project?
We've had a lot of discussions actually with HOC, because I think people know this, but if they don't, although we own the land underneath the HOC building and the land that serves as, if you people who park there know, there's a part of the parking lot that's really for Westwood 2 for this building, and then there's the portion right in front of the HOC tower, which is technically for the HOC residents. They have the option to purchase that property at a certain point in time and actually hold the fee. And our guess is that they will probably exercise that option at some point in time. But we've been in discussions with them about what we can do with that front parking lot, primarily just because we don't want it to be sort of standing out as an empty piece in the scheme we're talking about. And in terms of affordable housing, we've had discussions with them. I mean, obviously there's the requirement that goes along with any residential development. But putting that aside, we've had discussions with them about a variety of their programs. They brought to our attention, they have a senior housing program, they have, a variety that they'd like us to sort of talk with them about. And we said, look, we'll be happy to talk to you about it. And there's nothing formal yet. We have had those preliminary discussions.
May I ask about, because I know you had mentioned this concept of the grid of streets, and I know, and we heard that in all three of these schemes, and then also looking at proposing a grid of streets. Again, not seeing the plans, not seeing anything of your plans yet. Does this come closer to what you were envisioning?
No, I think, look, clearly, I think something we made clear at our meeting on Monday is our feeling is whenever you have a block this big, you have to break it up. So whether the grids look exactly like they're laid out on the schemes, I think is not as important as everyone acknowledging that it makes sense to break it up. So yeah, that's clearly something we're in agreement with. I think it creates a nicer streetscape. It creates an opportunity for more interesting architecture. It creates an opportunity to sort of protect the edges, the residential edges, and sort of define certain areas of the project. So clearly that's something that we've had in mind, and you're showing on these schemes. So that, I think that's a nice confluence.
And also along with that grid of streets, again, there was a lot of concern with regards to the impervious surface. And actually, Captain Nelson's over here as our environmental planner with regards to actually having tree canopy through your development and
I was going to say there'll be less impervious surface and more tree canopy than there is now.
I was just saying, you can't get any more impervious than you have now. So.
I'm willing to give that right now on the record.
Like the only thing I would say about the grid, which I think this area obviously was planned in an era when the automobile was king, and I think making streets that are more complete so people could walk and bike and get safe on them as well as drive them. One of the things we'll be doing as well is coming up with a hierarchy of streets. And we'll need to make it clear to folks which are the kind of A streets, the B streets, and the C streets, and how locations of surface and views are handled within adjacent properties and whatnot. But the nice thing about a grid is it gives you flexibility to be able to determine those things. It's not just one trick. We'll have to come back and say, well, this is really where we want our A frontages. We'll have to figure out loading and things like that happening. But the grid will allow us the flexibility.
So, again, on speaking about impervious surface in this case, and going back to the idea of the library, potential school site, if, say, for example, in scheme 2 or 3, we contemplate the idea of moving the library next to the civic green space, potentially proposing a school site, new school site where the current library is today, and or having a new school site that is adjacent to the Equity 1 site. The idea of maybe having part of what is now that impervious surface as an additional play field for the schools, especially if you're now going to have 2 schools on that site. We've heard from MCPS that they don't, even though that they can't have certain shared use between the elementary school and the middle school, that they would not necessarily be able to use all of those fields simultaneously because of the age groups. So that's something that needs to be.
Oftentimes, what is shown in these drawings of screen space tends to turn out as a complete hardscape picture. And so, along with the comments on impervious surface, we want to make sure that there is adequate soil volume and some open areas where you really can't have a canopy cover that is going to amount to something very significant over a period of time.
So, moving from impervious surface to probably an impervious conversation, parking. And of course, there's going to be a need for parking over here. And again, hopefully, by providing better connectivity to public transit, might be able to help with regards to your residents. People have been asking, is this going to be a scenario where it is obviously structured parking, something that is above ground structure, or is this going to be underground parking? Have you got any notions of that?
I think we spoke on Monday that what we would like to do is try and have a substantial amount of parking below grade effectively. I mean, because you have such a large slope on our giant shopping center site, it gives you the ability to sort of create underground parking without all the work that usually goes into that. We don't necessarily have to dig quite as much as you would if you were at a flat elevation. So it's something we're starting to look at. We like that. I don't see, there will probably be some surface parking still. It's hard to say what the proportion would be, but that's sort of what we're looking at. We have not at this point contemplated, the types of garages you would see in Bethesda, 4 or 5 story garages is not part of our thinking. I had mentioned on Monday the concept of second story retail to enable us to put tenants who are sort of with larger footprints up so that we could keep the ground plane for the smaller local retailers and sort of more of the restaurants and the coffee shops and all the things people like to just be able to walk in and out of. And so you could see a scenario where maybe there's parking tucked behind some of those shops. So that would effectively be surface parking, but it would be sort of covered surface parking. It's going to be a mix. But parking is a big issue. I recognize now that, look, even though that parking lot has a lot of flaws with it, and you mentioned 2 of them, I'm sure there's a lot of people who love that parking lot because they can park right in front of their store and they never have to fight for a parking spot. And that's a big positive. So we need to balance. I was going to say, oh my God, I'm right? Oh my God, I was just guessing. That's incredible. So we recognize that, and we recognize that there's very few people who would choose structured parking, be it below grade or above grade, over being able to park on the surface in front of their store. That's a pretty simple thesis. But we have done projects where you can make that type of parking work. You can make it appealing, you can light it, you can make it simple to access, simple to exit, all those things, and you can make it so that it is a reasonable alternative. Because again, that plus of having that simple, accessible parking, I think, is far outweighed, sorry to say, in my opinion, because it is creating huge amounts of impervious surface no matter what you do, and there's no way to make a parking lot an attractive feature. It makes it very difficult to create a pedestrian environment when you're dedicating, half of your site to parking. So I just think it's sort of, it goes against everything we've said we want to create with this project. So we have to figure out a way to manage that parking in a way that people still don't mind parking there without it sort of casting a shadow over the rest of the project.
Speaking about businesses, and I know you had mentioned this at the Sunrise series to some of the business owners, but just for the benefit of the folks here, there were questions from several of the shopkeepers there desiring the ability for Equity One to go and phase the project such that new buildings are constructed, the existing building is kept in operation, so that a business could immediately go and move to a new site as opposed to it being the existing site being demolished and their businesses having to go and relocate and maybe never coming back to this site again because of the fact that there's a strong desire by the community and the business owners of wanting to stay in this neighborhood.
Yeah. This is always, I'm sorry for laughing, it's always a funny question to me because, in general as a landlord, we tend to focus on getting rent, and it's hard to get rent if everything is shut down. So our goals are 100% aligned, that we are hoping desperately, no matter what ends up happening here, that we're able to keep significant parts of the shopping center functioning. I have no idea if we'll be able to do it. I have no idea at this point whether retailers will want to live through what will, no matter how well we execute it, a messy site. There's only so much we can do. I've done projects where that exact scenario has happened, where we've kept people open and been able to work around them. I've had other scenarios where it wasn't feasible, and it's a little hard to predict at this point. But, the question with the local retailers in general, it's just like when people say, oh, your goal is to get rid of the local retailers. And I tell them the same thing, I should put this on tape. but we like the fact that people are willing to come to meetings during the middle of the day to advocate for shops that they like. You typically don't get that with a lot of retailers, so that in my view is a positive. So I like the idea that people like retailers in my center. It doesn't give me incentive to kick them out. So, that's what I can say to that at this point. As for the construction though, it's way too early to figure out what you would be able to do with that.
And speaking of the retail configuration, so we had a couple of comments that kind of surfaced last night with regard, and this goes back to, is Westbard Avenue a retail street? Is it not a retail street? And somebody brought up the idea. You could talk about this. I brought up on the screen scheme 3 that probably most closely aligns, although not completely, with what the person there had mentioned. The idea of instead of retail being on Westbard Avenue, that the retail and the civic space and all of that is actually perpendicular to Westbard Avenue, and it becomes more internalized. I know, Matt, as an urban designer, I know that we all desire to go and make all streets good streets. So I kind of already know what you're going to say. But could you speak a little bit about the idea of having the retail also turn in perpendicular and having it more internalized to the site?
Well, I think retail thrives on visibility. So one of the things about Westbard, controlling both sides of Westbard, gives us the potential for a retail street that is visible and convenient to see the stores through the home. Turning the retail perpendicular to Westbard, I think, is possible to some degree. I think you can have retail that comes back this way. I think part of it depends upon how people come in and out of garages, what kind of retail is there, whether that's retail that's more local serving or destination. Not all retail is the same. Not all of it behaves the same way. It needs to be in the same locations. How you get up, if we do the second floor there, where the points are that you get up to those is going to be an issue. So I don't think there's any right or wrong answer necessarily, other than to say retail of all the kind of development types is the most location sensitive because it needs the visibility in order to be able to thrive. So, and when retail fails, it fails catastrophically. In other words, it's either there or it works really well or it's empty, right? It's not, and so that tends to be what happens. So I think one of the things we need to be mindful of is, and this is something Mike's company will do, which is figure out the right, ingredients of who goes where, and the kind of pattern that it generates, who needs to be next to whom, how, who needs this kind of visibility, where the restaurants go, do they aggregate and make a place. So I wouldn't say I think it's impossible. I just think that there's kind of a hierarchy of how that works, and one needs to be mindful of the needs of retailers.
Do you have any other comments with regards to the 3 schemes here? No.
Just so I understand, on Tuesday night, I guess I should say tonight, are you presenting something different, or are you going to keep with these and just get more feedback on these 3?
Yes. So the idea that we are working on is, again, each of these 3 schemes is not a big scheme in and of itself. It's a jigsaw puzzle, and we are hoping to basically throw anything and everything up on the wall and see what actually sticks. There are similarities, but there are also differences between the 3 schemes. And our hope was the feedback that we got from last night and the feedback that we're getting right now today is to go and pick and choose parts and pieces of these schemes, and maybe we go and narrow it down to 1, possibly 2 more schemes that have even more detail to it. These are still to some degree a bubble diagram, maybe a more elaborate diagram than a bubble diagram, but still, nonetheless, it's still very vague. What we're hoping to go and do is to provide the next level of detail and take the best aspects of each of these three and create either one or two more detailed schemes. We will bring that back to Walt Whitman tonight for additional comments. We will go back there tonight, and from the comments that we received tonight, we will then use that for our work on Friday, on Monday, on Tuesday, to come up with our final presentation that we will have on Tuesday evening over at Wesleyan Middle School. Thank you very much. No questions.